It has been hard for me to stomach the violent uprisings on many university campuses these past few weeks. But some things are becoming more obvious by the day. We are learning that these are not organic and spontaneous protests that are fueled mainly by students from the very schools whose campuses have become disgusting sites of hate for Israel, Jews, and America. The primary organizers of these riots and takeovers of campus buildings typically are older white women from very wealthy families who have no real gainful employment, and they just live off trust funds, and some of whom have for decades been professional protesters, engaging in everything from Occupy Wall Street to climate change disruptions to the more recent rallies for the terrorists of Hamas. You know, the people who massacred over 1,200 Jewish civilians, who took over 250 hostages, violently raped numerous women. Anyone pretending that these people have legitimate grievances is either ignorant of what has really been happening in Gaza or what Hamas continues to do, not just to Israelis, but to their own people. Or they know what hideous monsters led the attack on Israel, but they just don't care. You know, it's been evident that these protests were fueled by some big money. I mean, it took a lot of money to buy expensive tents, get professionally printed protest signs, and then there was the money needed for the supplies being used and money to make bail when these folks got arrested. But this past week, the news site Politico, which leans, let's just say, pretty far to the left, revealed that much of the funding is coming from Democrat megadonors like the far-left billionaire George Soros and the Tides Foundation, and by such Democrat funders as Susan and Nick Pritzker, the heirs to the Hyatt hotel chain. Also by David Rockefeller of the Rockefeller Foundation, and until recently, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, although they have stepped back from funding some of these groups. Now, the money usually goes to organizations that are euphemistically named things like Jewish Voice for Peace, which, by the way, is not Jewish, and it certainly is no voice for peace whatsoever. Assume that maybe a few of these billionaires are truly so stupid that they have no clue where their money is going, or that it's funding the worst outbreak of anti-Semitism since the Nazis targeted Jews in the lead up to the Holocaust. But if they now know their money is funding organizations calling for the slaughter of Jewish children and the destruction of the state of Israel, if they're remaining irresponsibly silent about it, it makes them complicit in the whole thing. By the way, we're also seeing that Joe Biden and his administration have become acutely schizophrenic as it relates to Israel. One day they pretend they stand with our most loyal, valuable, and vital ally. And then the next minute they're withholding sales of much-needed arms and ammunition and lecturing Israel on everything from their elections to their policies on how to defend their citizens against the ongoing attacks, the acts of terrorism, and the torture and holding of hostages even now, including, by the way, at least 5 American citizens still being held hostage. It has been unconscionable that President Biden has not mentioned the Americans being held hostage by Hamas, and he doesn't appear to be putting any resources into demanding their release or rescuing them. But Joe Biden is afraid of offending the radicals in his own party. You know, like kook Congress members Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who openly support the so-called Palestinians who, in fact, voted Hamas into power in Gaza. And by over 80%, they supported the savagery of October the 7th. President Biden ought to be afraid of offending the decency of the majority of the American citizens who support Israel's right to exist and to defend itself against the genocide of Hamas. And Hamas and its sugar daddy funder Iran vow to enact on Israel and ultimately the United States this same horror. This shouldn't be hard for Joe Biden. I mean, we hear people talk about the right side of history. I think it's time our elected officials get on the right side of sanity. And these days, they are not. Instead, they line up with the loons And hopefully, I just keep thinking that some responsible Democrats will declare that what their leaders are doing is a bridge too far. Thank goodness there are some students who have had enough, and they're standing up for sanity. This past week at the University of North Carolina, at Ole Miss, and even LSU, the pro-America students outnumbered those calling for the murder of Jews, even though it's obvious that some of the protesters are so dumb they don't even know what they're protesting. It was great to see those kids on those campuses putting the flag right back up after those protesters tried to take the American flag down. God bless them. America is in real trouble if we don't elect leaders at every level of federal, state, and local government who believe in simple law and order and who believe in a return to free speech, decency, and common sense. Folks, you can't afford to sit this election out, because doing so is siding with the crazies. It's just that simple. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I hope you will now. The button is just below this video, and there's a little bell next to it. If you click on those, YouTube will reluctantly start letting you know when we've got a new video uploaded.